lot of people think shutting down means someone doesn't care. But sometimes shutting down is what happens when a person was never taught how to safely process emotion in the first place. Because growing up, there are people who learned that emotions created tension, conflict, criticism, rejection, pressure. So instead of learning how to communicate through emotional moments, they learned how to escape them. That's why some people suddenly go quiet during serious conversations. Their body may still be present, but mentally they've already left the room. Not because they always want to hurt someone, not because they always want distance, but because vulnerability starts triggering pressure instead of connection. And the deeper the conversation becomes, the more overwhelmed they feel internally. A lot of people think emotional shutdown is calmness, but internally, some people are panicking while appearing emotionally flat on the outside, because shutting down can become a survival response. Some people learned growing up that explaining themselves didn't help. Expressing emotion didn't help. Being vulnerable didn't feel safe. So eventually they stopped trying. That's why emotional shutdown often isn't just about the current relationship. Sometimes it's years of emotional conditioning showing up in real time. And honestly, the dangerous part is that shutdown slowly damages connection over time. Because the other person usually feels ignored, unimportant, emotionally abandoned, or alone in the relationship. Meanwhile, the person shutting down may quietly feel overwhelmed, misunderstood, pressured, or emotionally trapped. So both people start hurting each other without fully understanding what's actually happening underneath the surface. That's why emotional shutdown becomes so confusing in relationships. One person thinks the other doesn't care, while the other person feels emotionally flooded and doesn't know how to stay open. And eventually, silence starts replacing communication. The problem is, avoidance usually creates the exact pain people are trying to escape. Because unresolved emotions don't disappear just because someone avoids them. They usually build quietly underneath the surface until distance starts replacing intimacy completely. And over time, the relationship slowly becomes emotionally hollow. Not because love completely disappeared, but because emotional safety never fully developed. That's why some people can sit beside someone they genuinely love and still emotionally disappear the moment things become vulnerable. Because emotional shutdown isn't always about love. Sometimes it's about fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of emotional failure, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not knowing how to respond correctly. And honestly, some people are so disconnected from their own emotions that when real conversations happen, their mind starts searching for escape before they even realize it consciously. That's why people sometimes change the subject, become defensive, get irritated suddenly, need space immediately, or emotionally go numb during important conversations. Their nervous system starts treating emotional exposure like danger. And if somebody grew up in environments where emotional honesty created punishment, shame, manipulation, or instability, vulnerability later in life can start feeling physically uncomfortable, even in healthy relationships. That's why healing emotional shutdown usually isn't just about talking more. It's about slowly teaching the nervous system that emotional presence is no longer dangerous. That connection doesn't automatically lead to rejection. That conflict doesn't automatically lead to abandonment. That vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to shame. Because emotionally safe communication is something many people never consistently experienced growing up. And honestly, a lot of emotionally shut down people aren't trying to be cold. Some of them are exhausted from constantly feeling emotionally overwhelmed internally while trying to appear normal externally. That's why some people need hours, or even days, to process conversations emotionally after they happen. Not because they don't care, but because emotional processing feels chaotic inside them. And sometimes by the time they finally understand what they feel, the moment has already passed. That's why emotional shutdown can create cycles of misunderstanding in relationships. One person keeps asking for emotional connection. The other person keeps feeling pressure. Then both people slowly become frustrated with each other. One feels emotionally abandoned. the other feels emotionally cornered. And eventually both people start protecting themselves instead of understanding each other. That's why emotional maturity isn't just about staying calm. It's about learning how to remain emotionally present when conversations become uncomfortable. Because real connection usually requires emotional exposure. And people who never learned emotional safety growing up often struggle when relationships begin demanding emotional honesty consistently. That's why healing sometimes starts with recognizing that shutting down may have once protected you. But now it may also be limiting your ability to stay connected to people you genuinely care about. And honestly, a lot of people don't need perfection emotionally. They just need presence. Even imperfect communication usually feels safer than emotional disappearance. Because when people emotionally disappear every time things get real, eventually the relationship starts feeling emotionally lonely even when two people are still together.